Welcome to Small Biz, Big Wins, where every episode is a new journey into the heart of entrepreneurship. I'm your host, Summer Poquette, here to navigate the thrilling world of small business with you. Each week, we dive into the inspiring stories and joyful triumphs of real business owners. Get ready to be empowered with actionable advice and, most importantly, celebrate the spirit of small business. Let's dive into how every small victory shapes your big success. This is Small Biz, Big Wins. Let's make it happen. Welcome back to another episode of Small Biz, Big Wins. I'm your host, Summer Poquette. And peeps, today's episode isn't sexy, but I promise you it's necessary. If you're running a small business and you have employees or you're working with contractors, do yourself a favor and turn up the volume and listen closely. Even if you're an entrepreneur and you're not quite ready to take that leap to hire somebody, this is still valuable information that someday you're going to need. If you're taking clients or you're working with clients and you have client contracts, you need to know how to protect yourself and your business. And we're going to talk about all of that, how you can avoid scope creep and so much more. I get that it's not fun to talk about contracts and it's not fun to talk about insurance either, or really for me to go to the accountant, but these are all necessary evils for running a small business. I've learned over the years that not having contracts or the correct wording in a contract, or maybe just going to Google and downloading a free contract is a costly mistake. So to help us navigate these muddy waters, I want to welcome Amy Stikovich with Nelson, Forster, and Stikovich PC, a law firm right here in Petoskey, Michigan. Amy is an attorney in Petoskey, Michigan, whom I have personally worked with over the years, and her expertise and legal guidance has been invaluable. And while she's not here with official legal advice, but rather educational information, I know that you're going to glean a lot from our conversation. And of course, if you have legal questions or need representation, I'm going to put all of Amy's information in the show notes so you can contact her after the show. So welcome, Amy, to Small Biz, Big Wins.
Hi, Summer. Thanks for having me. It's exciting to be here. It's my very first podcast that I've recorded, so this is kind of fun.
Oh, fun. You're going to absolutely nail it. It's going to be we'll make it easy for you. I promise. Yeah. So before we dive into the long list of questions that I have for you, tell me a little bit about your law firm and what you specialize in as an attorney, and how did you get started in this profession?
Sure. So I actually decided when I was a very young teenager that I wanted to be a lawyer. I don't know why. I think it was because I like to read, and that seemed like a really good profession that fit with reading a lot, and that is true.
Yeah.
But so I kind of stuck with that, and I got my bachelor's degree in English with writing, and then went to law school. I'm originally from Chicago, so I grew up in the Chicago suburbs. Went to law school in Chicago, and then worked at a couple firms in the city and in the suburbs, and eventually in fall of 2016, my family and I relocated to northern Michigan. So I am married. My husband's a realtor as a brokerage in town, and I have two daughters. One is in her first year at NCMC, and I have a junior at Harvard Light. So pretty busy with them. But I started my own firm when I had my oldest daughter. So that was back in 2005. And I worked part-time to full-time, just kind of depending on the caseload. And then when we came up here, I started a firm here, and I was on my own as a solo for a couple of years, kind of building that practice, which was
Yeah.
very interesting because I didn't know anybody here. And then in 2020, I joined with Claire Forster, Jennifer Deegan, and Jane Nelson, and we formed Nelson, Deegan, Forster, and Stikovich. And since then, Jennifer Deegan's now the circuit court judge. So she left. And so Jane, Claire, and I run the firm. Jane and Claire do estate planning, and my area is kind of a mix. We're in a small town, so it's really hard to focus on one specific area.
Mhm.
I do litigate. So with that, I do business litigation, probate litigation. I do court appointments for the probate court for guardianships and conservatorships. And then kind of my transactional advice part of the practice, I do business and real estate. And I work with quite a few small to mid-sized businesses. Um, just doing general business consultation, drafting contracts, and then of course the employment aspect comes into that as well. And
Sure.
employment law is something that I've been doing since early in my legal career. So
Okay.
I've been doing it for quite a while. And one of the firms that I worked with early on had a transactional side and then a litigation side. And the transactional attorneys would always give their contracts to the litigators to look at because we could issue spot and see where some language might be an issue. So kind of went from there.
Wow. So you do a lot of everything, but I you do a lot of reading. So I think that's the hard part about law is
Yeah.
that there it's a lot of reading, but it's a lot of language that the layman doesn't understand. Me,
Yes.
right? So it's
And
it's
that's
hard.
it is. It is. And that's kind of where I my writing background comes in handy because I try to draft so people actually understand what they're signing. I
Mhm.
really try to steer away from using a lot of legalese and using language that a layperson would understand because they're the ones that are signing the contract and agreeing to be bound by it.
Yeah.
And if you're signing 50 pages of, hitherto and therefores, you're not going to know what you're signing until you get sued and some other lawyers interpreting it and say, well, this is what this means. You're like, I didn't know what I was signing. So,
Yeah.
I try to keep contracts as short as possible, but
Okay.
covering what needs to be covered to protect both parties.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how you said protect both parties because I've always been told, and this came from my dad who owns a business, is that the contract is only as good as the two people that sign it. And it should
Hmm.
be a contract that's protecting you and the person signing it. It's not really a one-way street. Um,
Right.
so I think so let's get started with, what are some key elements? So I am going to hire somebody and I need a contract.
Mhm.
What are some key elements that that contract needs to include to protect both myself and the employee?
So I think one of the first things that needs to be determined is whether the employee is actually going to need a contract. It's not always necessary in an employer employee relationship. And sometimes I don't recommend it,
Okay.
especially if it's for you know lower pay employees or employees that aren't executive level, because Michigan's an at-will employment state, and so that gives both the employer and the employee freedom to terminate an employment relationship with or without cause. Of
Okay.
course, from the employer's standpoint, that's as long as the termination is not for a discriminatory reason, which
Yeah.
we can get into later if we need to. But if you decide, yes, I really want this employee to be on a contract and to have a contract, the keys are the length of the contract. So if
Mm.
the employee is only going to be working for you for a specific term, or you only want this contract to be good for a year, you want to make sure that's in there. Um, how the employee is going to be compensated is big.
Got
And,
it.
salary is part of that, hourly. One of the biggest areas that I've seen issues is bonus structure. A lot of
Mm,
times, employees that get a base salary or an hourly rate and then they get a quarterly bonus or annual bonus, if that's not in writing so that the employee and the employer know when the bonus is going to be paid, that does create a lot of issues. So the keys with the bonuses are how much the bonus is going to be and when the bonus is earned. That's kind of what the lawyer who might be handling this down the road is looking for, because if it doesn't say when the bonus is going to be earned, that creates problems for an employee who leaves
mm,
prior to um, the term or the date or whatever. If
yeah.
the bonus is earned when a sale is made rather than when the sale is paid, that could be a big difference.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense, and that definitely is for a higher level employee. So, like, if I own an ice cream shop and I have an 18-year-old working for me, that's not gonna be a contract, right?
No,
Like,
no, you're not
but
going to need a contract.
yeah,
Right.
but if, you're running a marketing agency and I have people that are, on a salary and their
Hmm.
expectations, those are things that I might want a contract for. Not necessarily.
Right.
So I guess it really depends on how you are structuring your em- employee employer
Right.
relationship.
And sometimes you might not have a contract that covers everything. You might just have maybe you have a bonus agreement, and
Okay.
so you have a kind of a mini contract, for lack of a better word, that just covers that bonus structure. It doesn't
Okay.
cover anything else like PTO or benefits or anything like that, because most of the time that stuff's going to be in an employee manual that the employee can refer to, and then you might have an offer letter that you've given to the employee when they first start that outlines what their compensation structure is. And so it really, lawyers are famous for saying it depends, but it really does. And that's why that's why it's important to
Yeah.
actually, I know it can be costly from the outset, but it is important to consult with an attorney and kind of lay out, here's what I want for my business. What do you recommend as far as my employees and how I structure them? Are they
Sure.
contract, or are they contract for, the first couple years and then they shift to an at will? What is going to be the best for my business structure? And if you
Mhm.
lay out the funds at the beginning and get a really good system in place, then you're going to have fewer problems down the road. And
Sure.
for me, what I do is do that consultation, and I will give my client a template. So they
Mhm.
don't come to me every time they hire a new employee to have a contract drafted. They
Okay.
have a template that they use. And there's specific terms in there that they can change, because obviously the compensation is going to be different
Sure.
for each employee, but they have the template. So they're laying out the money at the beginning to get that template, but then they're using it, modifying
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
for each employee that comes in.
For sure, it's an investment up front, and I think, that
Right.
is scary if you have a business and you see, you're like, "Oh my gosh, it's gonna cost me this much money," but if you invest in it, up front, it's going to save you a lot of money, just like insurance, right? Like, it's an
Right.
investment, but it's something you have to do to protect your business or to avoid having things that you don't need as well.
Right.
Eh,
Right.
and there's employment laws. So I think that's the other thing. Like if you go online and there's a lot of online, sites you can go to get contracts, but do they actually take into account the state you're in and the current employee employment laws?
Right, and please don't do that.
Yeah. Please don't do that.
Please don't pull contracts off of Google. I've litigated contracts off of Google, it is not fun.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so that's the other thing the attorney is gonna do, is look at the current state of the law, because things are changing all the
Yeah.
time. And, I will talk a little bit later about non-compete agreements, but that's one area where the law is changing, and there's bills being proposed to change who can have a non-compete, when non-competes are going to be binding. So
Mhm.
there's different things like that that come into play.
Yeah.
So it is important just to do that initial consult if you think that you want your employees to be on contract.
Yeah,
And one thing I
absolutely.
should also mention, the things that should be in the contract are the duties that the employee is supposed to perform,
Okay.
and how the contract can be terminated. That's another big issue that comes up, because unlike an at will employee that, your employer just doesn't want to work with you anymore, as
Mhm.
long as the reason's not discriminatory, you can be terminated. And I mean, it's unfortunate. I've talked to a lot of people in the past 20 plus years who have been terminated for, seemingly unjustly, but, that's the virtue of at will.
Yeah.
And I can see it from both perspectives, because the employer also needs to have the freedom to run their business in
Absolutely.
a way that, makes sense economically. And sometimes there comes a point where you just cannot afford to have all the employees that you have. So
Absolutely.
when an employee is on a contract, you need to have kind of like an easy out for you both, which is, you can terminate the contract with 30 days notice for no reason.
Okay.
But then you want to have, sometimes I've had clients, and these are usually with higher level executive employees, that kind of term is not in the contract, and it's a for cause termination only.
Yeah.
So,
So if
or a termination at the end of the term.
Okay, good to know. And so yeah, where Michigan is an at will, but anyone
Mhm.
listening, they could be from anywhere. So you really need to make sure that you check, your state's
Right.
employment laws because they're different in every state. And how does that
Mhm.
um cross borders or cross lines from states? Like, let's say for myself, I had an employee in Florida, so now I have to obey by multiple state laws. How does that work?
Um,
Does that get sticky?
it gets really sticky.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot depends on how it's structured, whether the employer has an actual business in the state, or whether
Mm,
that person is just working in another state. And this is becoming you know an area of litigation because of the remote workers that have happened since
yeah.
COVID.
Yeah.
And even in this area, we've had so many people move up to beautiful northern Michigan because it's a
Yes.
lovely place to live and work, even in the dead of winter. And people don't want to live in the bigger cities. They want a quieter area, small town. And now their business allows them to work from a local, a place that they desire, instead of
Yeah.
being in the office every day. So I think, that's something that, if you're going to have remote workers, that's something that you really need to consult with an attorney about, to see what the obligation is going to be to comply with more than one state's
Yeah.
laws. And I will say, I practiced in Illinois for a really long time, and now I've been in Michigan for about 8 years. And there's a lot of similarities in the law. A lot
Mhm.
of the state laws kind of stem from federal laws. So there, sometimes they're different. Like, you might not be at will, or there's differences in how non-competes are handled, or but
Mhm.
as far as one issue that comes up is employers not paying final checks.
Oh,
The laws that I've seen are pretty consistent with that. So I
okay.
think that if there's going to be questions and you're going to have a lot of remote employees, that's something definitely to
To
consult with an
consult the
attorney about.
attorney, yeah, which is good
Yeah.
information because I know a lot of people, especially like in Michigan, lower Michigan, you have a lot of people that live in Ohio that are coming back and
Hmm.
forth. And I do know we do have a lot of remote workers in the Petoskey, northern Michigan area that are coming and going. I was an employer for a company in California for a while. And so, it
Yeah.
was just, um, it is sticky. There's different contracts, there are
Yeah.
different rules. So if I'm a small business owner and I am in the hiring process, what are some mistakes that I can avoid so that I don't end up at the end it, it being sued, or, like what can I do to prevent some things down the road? Obviously, consulting with an attorney in advance to before I start hiring is always the most
Right.
beneficial thing. But do you have
You
any
you want to
recommendations?
get Yeah, the part of the consultation with the attorney is making sure that you have good hiring practices and a system in place. And one of the biggest mistakes I've seen over the years is not properly vetting employees, because, sometimes there's just, it's desperation, because you need, all of a sudden you've had large growth and you need people
Yes.
in order to sustain your business. And sometimes, you're just hiring people without checking references, without having some kind of probationary period, without, doing more than one interview to make sure it's a good fit. So I think, a lot depends on what your specific business is. Obviously, if you're running an ice cream shop, like you mentioned earlier, it's
Yeah.
not going to be as critical. But if you're running a business where you're hiring people who are going to learn your process is, and they're going to be dealing with, clients that you've had for a long time, and they're in your finances, and that you just want to make sure that they're properly vetted. So I would typically recommend, getting a couple references and actually checking the references, and not
Yeah.
just relying on reference letters. um because with AI and that, who knows where they're coming from.
Oh, no.
So
This was one of my biggest mistakes, and I talked about it on a podcast about, some of the biggest mistakes I've made in business thus far since 2008, and it is not doing your due diligence before you hire. And like you said,
right.
sometimes you just, oh, well, this person worked for so and so, then they must have been great. Well, not necessarily. And so, doing your background checks, checking your references, having more than just yourself in an interview, I think is
Yes.
really important. Because sometimes your management team or your leadership team can recognize some red flags that
Hmm.
you maybe didn't, because you are desperate for hiring. So I think
Right.
that is great advice for anybody if they are thinking of hiring, is like, do your due diligence. Like, I can't say that
Yes.
enough. And now I'm like extra cautious about everything, but it's really,
Yes.
really important.
Yes. And I go to a lot of seminars for with lawyers, and we had a presentation by the owner of Sarah's law firm. And she gave a really, really good tip. When she hires, she does the interview in office, but then she has a dinner. And so
Mm,
it's on kind of a different, there's a different tone to it,
there
because you're
is.
not,
Yeah.
in your, you know business dress suits, whatever, sitting in a
Yeah.
conference room answering very official questions. You're at a more relaxed
Mm,
location, and then you can kind of see a different side of the person. And when you have your other staff with you, you can see if that's going to be a good fit.
yeah.
Which is important, and that's just part of the hiring process. So I would, yeah, that's
Yeah. I
the
love
references,
that.
and kind of having more than one person
Absolutely.
involved.
I love that advice of doing something outside of the office with your team, because I think there's a few things you'll see. You'll see, first off, if let's say you go to a nicer restaurant, you're going to see how they dress, how they present themselves. You're going to see how they interact with your team in a more
Mhm.
casual setting, because synergy with your team is really important too. If you're
Right.
building a team, and how they kind of connect, or did two people start having a really great conversation, and so I love that idea of adding that as an extra layer before hiring. Good advice. Good advice.
Yeah, and don't be afraid of the 90-day, 60-day, whatever probationary period. Just to make sure that it's going to be a good fit. I mean, as an attorney, when I was first starting out, it was a really rough job market when
Mm,
I first got out of law school. And many of the people that I went to law school with started out doing internships, or doing working as just kind of like an independent contractor for a
sure.
couple of months, just to see if it was a good fit in the firm, both from the employee's side and from the employer's side. And then there was the, hired as an employee. But
Yeah, and higher.
yeah, that's a good check. And do a review at the end, just to see if everybody is on the same page, if we're
Yeah.
working out, and if it's not working out, then um,
Absolutely. And
it
I also
doesn't
learned
go.
that documentation is really important. So, like, when
Yes.
you
Oh,
have that
100%.
30, 60, 90-day review, that you're documenting it, that they're signing, that if in those 30, 60, 90 days there are any issues that arise, that any emails or any written, or verbal conversations in regards to warnings, that it's all just dated, timestamp, documented, and
Yep.
somebody else is kind of signing that, it's not just you against that employee, that it's actually
Yeah.
documented that there are witnesses. And so I do think, doing your due diligence, doing your 30, 60, 90-day, meeting with an attorney to make sure you have, your system in place is really important.
Right.
You mentioned independent contractors. So what are the key differences between an independent contractor and an an actual employee, and why business owners need to kind of distinguish between the two, because we use both.
Right. So, um, I think this is an area that is becoming more and more contested, for lack of a better word. The
Okay.
IRS is really looking into it. A lot of times, employers want to call an employee an independent contractor because of the tax liability,
Oh.
because the employer has to pay the employer side tax, and then of course the employee pays their employment taxes. But an independent contractor is self-employed and they have to pay the whole thing, so there's
Mhm.
really not as much that the employer is having to pay when they have an independent contractor. The independent contractor does not have benefits. They don't
Mhm.
have the PTO, the pension, the retirement, whatever other benefits you're offering
Yeah.
to your employees. So the big thing to look for is control. Can you
Okay.
control how the contractor does their job? And another thing that I usually look for is, does the contractor have the freedom to go work someplace else?
Okay.
So if they're providing a particular service, is this only for you, or is this a service that they can provide to other businesses? I've seen case law where it's been looked at, is the contractor providing something that your business normally does, that, so
Oh.
you have two people doing the exact same thing. If you call one an employee and one an independent contractor, that's going to probably raise some red flags.
Oh, that's
So
interesting. Okay.
yeah. So, typically, as far an independent contractor would absolutely have a contract. They would have a contract, and it has to be for a specific term. It can't just be open ended.
Okay.
So typically those are a year. Sometimes it's a little bit less. And the contract is going to specify how the contractor is going to be paid, when the contractor is going to be
Mm.
paid. And then these are contracts that I draft pretty frequently.
Okay, that makes
So
sense.
I make sure it's in there. The employer cannot direct how the contractor does his or her work. Um, it's just, so you're basically giving a project and a due date.
As
Sometimes go ahead, sorry.
Well, I'm curious, as an employer, can I, and I'm working with a subcontractor, can I have expectations of time frame? Like,
Yes.
you're available between 8 to 5 because that's our business hours. Can you dictate
Yes.
those things?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. You can say, this is when, I expect you to be available, but you can't necessarily say you have to be in the office from 8 to 5.
Okay, perfect.
Sometimes, and it really depends on the situation where the contractor is performing his work. Sometimes
Mm,
the contractor is working remotely. Sometimes they're in your office, and you could say, okay, this is when we're open, so we have an expectation that you're going to be here during this time to answer questions.
okay.
But part of the independent contractor relationship is they're not being told how to get the job done. They're providing their own tools. So you're not providing your contractor with a computer. You're
Mm,
not providing your contractor with other things that he or she might need in order to get the job done. Typically I would make sure that you have a EIN, or a social security number for the contractor. And a lot of times, just because there's been so many issues coming up with this, I try to have my clients have the contractors with their own LLC, so
okay,
there is
that's
a
what I was going to
clear
ask. So the
distinction.
contractor,
Yeah.
I mean, should have their own business, and
Yes.
they pay their own, should they have insurance?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, they should have their own workers' comp, because sometimes independent contractors will have their own employees. They'll have
Mhm.
their own assistant or something. So that's all in the contract, that they have their own business insurance. They have their own
Okay.
workers' comp insurance if it's necessary. They have, they're responsible for their taxes. There's not a hiring. I mean, that's the contract specifically says, this
Yeah.
is not a hiring between the parties. You're providing this service, And, if it's just one project, the contract could even specify the project that the
Perfect.
contractor is going to perform. It's important not to just pull a contract off of one of the sites you
Yeah.
might find on the internet, and actually you want to make sure that this is right, because this is something that if you are calling somebody an independent contractor and they're actually an employee, that can create issues for you down the road. Because
Mm,
and I've had it happen. I've actually recommended to people, you need to file a claim, because that is an employment relationship, and that employer should
wow.
have been paying your taxes, the employer side taxes. So there
Wow.
can be tax liabilities down the road. And I haven't
Mm,
personally had the IRS come do an audit or anything of a client because of their independent contractor
sure.
relationships, but it can happen.
No, I believe it, and I think that because there are more independent contractors and more people wanting to be independent contractors, I can see
Mhm.
why the government is kind of looking at that a little more closely. From an employer standpoint, having a contractor, yeah, it is expensive to have employees. I mean, it is
Yep.
expensive to pay the taxes, to, offer any type of benefits, have to pay for the PTO and the computer. And so it can be attractive to a small business owner to instead just work with independent contractors. But it's important for, like, you kind of distinguish the difference that, if you are an employer and you are working with an independent contractor, you can't expect them to do the same things your employee does. Like, you need to be here at
Right.
8, you need to do this. Like, can't dictate a lot of things when you're working with an
Right.
independent contractor. I've personally found that working with independent contractors is a great way to subsidize some of the things that we don't
Yes.
offer. So, like, we don't have in-house photography and videography. We don't have in-house web designer right now. So I subcontract that out to an
Yep.
independent contractor who is, another business. So it's a great way for us to supplement your business. I've also found it's a great way to dip your toes into working with somebody. Like,
Yes.
okay, you nailed this project. Now I want to hire you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep, and that's exactly right. And if a good place to start, if you don't want to just call a lawyer and immediately hire a lawyer, just look at the IRS website.
Mm,
IRS.gov has the guidelines for independent contractor. It has, here's what an independent contractor is, here's what an employee is. I mean, that's a good place to
mhm.
start. And then definitely, consult with an attorney and to get that template in place if you're going to be hiring
Yeah, and I think anybody
contractors.
out there that is working as an independent contractor should be very aware that they need to form an LLC, they need to have an EIN, they
Yep.
have to pay taxes, and that they
Yes.
should consider getting insurance, because I can't tell you how many people, especially the younger people that want to start freelancing and they want to work with businesses and do things, and everyone has to start somewhere. But when you are going to do this, you also need to make sure you're protecting yourself and you're doing it correctly. So
Right.
if you're out there and you're like,
Right.
hey, I'm thinking of getting started and I'm going to freelance and be an independent contractor to dip my toes into this, profession, then yes, get your LLC,
Yes.
get your
Get your
insurance.
LLC. Yep.
Yes, and so many people do not do that, and if they come to us and they wanna work with us and they say they're an independent contractor and we ask for those things and they can't provide them, then we can't work with them.
Right.
So, I
Right.
think.
And there's some independent contractors that don't have LLCs, that just use their social security number. And I don't like it. It's
Yeah,
I
we
think
don't work
it's
with
clean.
them.
I think it's cleaner just to, the person has their own business.
Yep,
like your photographer is going to
yep,
have their own LLC and their own business. And in that kind of case, it's not somebody that's just sitting at a desk. They're out in the field,
yeah,
and the possibility for injury or for something happen is,
100%.
higher
Yep,
than somebody that's just sitting at a desk doing projects like that. So
for sure.
it's important to make sure, and in some cases I've had clients that I put in their contracts that they give to their independent contractors, you have to provide me with proof of insurance.
Mm,
I had one that their contractors were driving to different places. I'm like,
mm,
you need their vehicle insurance, and
yeah.
you need to see their liability insurance and make sure that they have this, because you can never fully prevent yourself from getting sued, but you want to make sure that you have documented everything and you have good documents in place so that if you do get sued, you can just give all that to your lawyer and hopefully, comes
Yeah.
to an end
You
pretty
want to
quickly.
mitigate all the risks, just like insurance
Right.
too. But even
Absolutely.
as our agency, we do work for all sorts of different companies. And for example, Emmett County. So we do a lot of work for Emmett County. And when we do work for them, they need our proof of insurance. They need all sorts of
Mhm.
stuff to prove that we're legit for them to work with us. And they're
Right.
protecting themselves. And, yes, they're a municipality, but I think, we've worked for a lot of companies, the same thing, that we are literally, an independent contractor for another company doing work for them. And we have to prove that we're legitimate so that they're
Right.
mitigating their risks. So it's just an important thing to do. Now, there
Yes,
there are
definitely.
so many companies nowadays that have these remote or hybrid work models.
Mhm.
That's just becoming so popular. Are there specific clauses, or maybe this is just something that is good enough if it's in your employee handbook? I'm not sure. But how do you protect yourself as an employer, addressing like that remote hybrid work model, or what your expectations are, especially since COVID? Like, it just became commonplace that you could work from home. But do you
Right.
need something in a contract, or is it just good enough in your employee handbook?
No, I would definitely have it in your contract. If you have an employee that is strictly remote, I would definitely do a contract. I would
Okay.
also have it in your employee manual. Um, and, just so those guidelines are there for the off chance that somebody who's working in the office becomes remote, I would just have it
Mhm.
in there just
Okay.
as kind of safety safety
Sure.
mechanism, so it's
Sure.
there. But yet definitely the remote worker needs to have that covered in their contract. And one thing that employers probably don't think about is workers' compensation.
Mm,
Because if an employee is working remotely and they're injured at their house in the course of work, they could still have a workers' compensation claim. So
yikes.
that is something I know
I
it's
don't like hearing
crazy
that,
to
Emily,
think
or
about.
Amy. I do not like that at all, Amy. Like, no, that's scary because I don't know what
Yeah,
their work conditions are at home.
right. So that's why you need to have in place kind of like a safe workspace guidelines.
Mm,
You know, tell me what your, I mean, not recommending that you go to their house and see where they're
sure.
working, but they can send pictures, are there wires laying all over the
Okay.
floor? Are you, just sitting at your kitchen table. I mean, where are you working? Because you want to make sure they're in a safe environment. And it's something that you should, of course, talk with your insurance agent about for both the business liability
Sure.
insurance and the workers' comp, and also
Mm,
cyber insurance too. I mean, that's
absolutely.
another thing because they're not working on the safe internet that you've got set up at your office. They're working on their home internet, and you
Mhm.
want to have cybersecurity coverage, and you want to make sure that whether they're using a VPN or using something like that when they're working to decrease any blowback on you should something go awry. But
Mm,
the contract with the remote, in addition to the safe space, I would have um, very clear terms of what the expectations are as far as availability for telephone
okay.
calls or meetings, check-ins, because what you don't want to have happen is you hire um, Jane as a independent or as an independent contractor or a remote employee, and then you don't see them or hear from them for months.
Yeah, there are a lot of
But they
risks.
still want to get paid. Yeah, yeah. So there's risks to
Okay.
hiring because they're not in the office. So I think it's really important to put some parameters in place as far as this is when you're expected to check in, and
Okay.
obviously you want their compensation structure in there as well. um, it's kind of difficult to do a remote worker on an hourly because you
Yeah,
can't really see if they're working. But, I think there's probably some computer programs out there or something that can track it.
totally,
But
like the
I think
spying stuff,
just,
yeah.
yeah, just making sure that everybody is on the same page as what the expectations are.
Okay.
And if, I would probably do more frequent reviews with a remote employee.
Okay.
Usually people are on an annual review. I'd probably do every 6 months or so, just because you're going to need more frequent check-in because you're not seeing them in the office every day.
Yeah, yeah,
Obviously, if you can see their work product and they're doing great, then there's less to worry about. But just
absolutely.
having those clear expectations in place and making sure there's a safety checklist, you've got your cybersecurity in place, then those are the things that I would kind of look for.
Yeah, for sure. And for anybody listening, definitely we talked about gosh, what episode was it? I think it was episode 9 with Ashley DeCartwright from Harbor Brand Insurance, all about this cyber insurance and how important it really is. I'll put that in the show notes
Hmm.
as well. But yes, making sure that you're insured and covered is really important. And I do think, a lot of people have a flexible schedule where I know
Hmm.
in our agency, there are days that your kid's home sick and we let people work from home. And so I think if you don't have specific things, and tell me if I'm wrong, Amy, but if you don't have specific things in your contract, but you are a more flexible employer, that as long as it's in your employee handbook or everybody's
Yeah.
not abusing it, that's my biggest concern as my agency grows, making sure that you don't have that abuse of some people work from home every day and some people don't, and some people take off every day at noon to go see their kids, and like how do you keep it fair? And maybe that's
Um,
the employee handbook, maybe that's
yeah.
you
Yeah,
feel it.
it's the employee handbook, and it's certain positions lend themselves to working remotely. If your employee is the receptionist, they're going to need to be in the office because they're
Absolutely.
the face of the company and they're greeting people when they come in. And they're answering the phones, even though, these days with cloud based phones, they can
Yeah.
probably answer the phone from home. But,
Yep.
that kind of position is usually expected to be in the office. Whereas if you actually hired a photographer as part of your staff, that person's working remotely. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's the differentiation there, but having, um, some people even advertise positions as this is a remote
Mm,
position. This is not a remote position. This is a hybrid. So you can work from home X amount of hours a week, but you need to be in the office this many hours a week.
got it. So putting
And
those
then if for
limitations.
yeah, for the situation that you described where you have an employee that's usually in the office, but they're going to go work from home because their kids are sick or something like that, I think having your remote work covered in your employee manual should be
Okay.
sufficient because, even though the employee manual is not a contract, most of the time, so it's another completely different
Yeah.
issue that probably could take a whole episode. But,
Yeah. Well,
um,
and that is confusing because, I to me, I feel like an employee handbook kind of is your it's your expectations and your guidelines for your companies. It's like the
yes, it
rule,
is.
right? And there's always the exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, it's keeping everybody kind of on the same page to me,
Right.
versus
Right.
it being a
And it's
contract.
yeah, so like I said, I practiced in Illinois for a long time, and there was a very big case in Illinois about the employee manual, and an employee was actually successful in arguing that it created a contract, and
Mm.
the issue came up because she was terminated, and the employer did not follow the specific disciplinary guidelines that it had in its manual.
Oh.
So usually employers will have tiered discipline within the catch-all, but we don't have to follow this. So
Mhm.
in that case came out and the manual was decided to be a contract, lawyers then started writing, and I do this to this day, even here in Michigan, this is not a contract. I write it on the front cover. I write it,
Okay.
this is not intended to create a contract. And that is for the protection of the employer, really, because
Got it.
like you said, Summer, the manual is the expectations and the guidelines for the business.
Mhm.
It's not something that you want to be um, bound to down to every dotted I or crossed T,
Yeah,
because different facts come up and you need to be able to be a little bit flexible.
for sure.
Um, so anyway, that's employee manuals are definitely an important thing to
Yeah.
have as your business grows. I mean, if you only have a couple employees, probably not as
Yeah,
critical, but when you've got, the management, and then you've got like 5 or 6 employees, it's important to have, because it gives something for the employees to look at as
for
well.
sure.
When they're curious, do I have Martin Luther King Day off? Well, look at the employee manual, because that's going to list the holidays, and
Absolutely.
that's an easy thing for them to look at. Or how
Yeah,
much PTO do I get when I'm 5 years in? That's
absolutely. Yeah, it's
a
just setting
guideline
that.
for them to
Yeah.
have there.
And when I
Yeah.
had just one person or two people, we didn't have one. But as we started to grow, we realized how important it was to have everybody on the same page and everyone could go to the
Right.
same document and reference that. So let's talk a little bit about the non compete and
Oh, yeah.
confidentiality agreements, because,
I have a
you know,
love-hate relationship with the non-compete.
yeah. Well, and I remember years ago, I applied to work for an agency. This was probably 10 years ago, in Traverse City. And the agency non compete was so strict that I couldn't work within a 2 hour radius of the Traverse City area, for a year, with like another agency or even in the whole realm of marketing. And so it was really
Mhm.
strict. And it's why I didn't go to work with this agency. I was like, wow, I'm like, I would put myself completely out of work for this amount of time if I leave this agency. So, what can you do and you can't do to protect yourself as an employer, which is what you want to do, right? Like, I mean, but
Right.
then at the same time, you have to think your employees need to be able to leave because it's a free will to leave and be able to flourish and work too, but not take your trade secrets. And like, how does all this work?
Right. So, I mean, there's a couple different agreements. Obviously, the one that most employers will have is a confidentiality or non-disclosure agreement. And that is pretty straightforward. It's going to be enforceable. The key to all of these are they have to protect a legitimate business interest. So, if, what you deem as confidential really isn't confidential because everybody's doing it, that's
Hmm.
probably not going to fly.
Sure.
But you just have the employee, usually it's stated in the employee manual, but again, because the employee manual is not a contract, I usually
Hmm.
advise clients to do a separate confidentiality agreement if that's something that's important for their business. And that's going
Okay.
to outline anything that you learn here is confidential. Client identity is confidential. What we do for the clients is confidential. You can't discuss it, and that contract will survive termination of
Okay.
employment, whether it's a voluntary separation or involuntary separation.
Okay.
Then the next level up, I think, is a non-solicitation agreement, and that's something that you can do separately. Sometimes it goes hand in hand with, I mean, I shouldn't say sometimes, all the time it goes hand in hand with a non-compete, but you can also do a non-solicitation separately, and that
Ah,
is an agreement that you're not going to directly solicit um, my clients. If
okay.
there's a client that you worked with at my business, and that, you cannot solicit them when you go work for our direct competitor. You can't call them up and say, hey, come work with me. That
Okay.
also goes to, sometimes employers like to put in there that you're not going to solicit employees either. So you're not going
Mm,
to, try to pull everybody out, which happens quite often when,
yeah.
somebody is kind of disgruntled and they don't want anybody to work for you. They don't want to work for you and they don't want anybody else. So they found, the pot of gold, the
Sure.
greatest job ever, and they want to bring everybody with them.
Okay.
So there's can be a non-solicitation of employees for, and usually those terms are for a year.
Okay.
Where this becomes a little bit tricky is um, you don't want to have a contract where you're preventing the consumer from making a choice.
Mm,
So I worked on a non-solicitation agreement a few years ago where I actually put language. I was working for the employee, and I actually put language in the non-solicitation that it didn't apply if the customer contacted the employee. So if the customer really liked working with this employee, the employee left, the customer found out where the employee went, and then the customer called.
Sure.
That is not a direct solicitation by the employees. So I've seen those contracts both ways. Like, you can't work with
Mhm.
anybody that you've worked with, or you can't directly solicit. But if the customer comes to you through
Sure.
no, action of your own, that's different. And a lot of times, the non-solicitations will be part of negotiations. If there
Mm.
is a termination and there's a severance package, and that's the language of the non-solicitation is usually negotiated, how deep it's going to be, because I've seen it, you can't contact anybody, and it doesn't matter if they come to you or if you um seek them out.
Okay.
Um,
Is it
so
common
then the
for, like, is it common for, like, employers to have contracts with their clients? So, like, I would have a contract with my client. I would in my client contract, actually, I prohibit my client from soliciting,
um
like, trying
I
to
don't see
poach
that very
my
often.
okay.
Yeah, I don't see
Mm.
that very often. I think it really would depend on the type of business that you're
Okay.
running. For your business, yes, that's probably a good thing to have. I haven't seen any case law that's directly addressed that kind
Interesting, because 'cause
of
I've seen it in for
contract.
cleaning companies. I've seen it for cleaning companies. Like, if I
Yes.
hire a cleaner, I can't then
Yes.
try to go poach that cleaner to just come clean for me
Yes.
and work
I
be
have
my
seen it.
housekeeper.
I have seen it and have litigated
Oh,
for cleaning
okay.
companies. So, yeah. So, that is, that the cleaning company contract's super interesting, actually, because you're hiring people and you're sending them into the home where, the personal space of the
Yeah.
client, where they're developing a relationship
Mhm.
with the homeowner. So why would the homeowner want to pay the company when they can pay the cleaner directly? I mean, that's kind of where the issue comes up. And so in that case, yes, I would put in, the agreement with
Yeah.
the client. You cannot directly solicit um my employees to come and work for you. And then the non-competes for the cleaning companies are a little bit trickier, just because
Sure.
then you're getting into what we can talk about next is who's an appropriate employee for a non-compete, because they are, as a whole, strongly disfavored, and there is a shift. It's really becoming, it's a state by state thing. Nothing's really
Mm,
happened on the federal
interesting.
level yet. But for example, in Illinois, where I practiced for a long time, we had a beautiful case come down. I loved it because I was doing a lot of non-compete for employees at that time. And I was doing some for
Okay.
employers, but I had employees calling me as well. And one thing that you have to have with a non-compete agreement is consideration, which, I mean, you have to have with
Mm,
every contract. It's so basically
sure.
you're getting something or you're giving something up. Well, when an employee goes to work for an employer and they're giving a non-compete agreement, what's the consideration? I mean, typically the consideration is continued employment.
Mhm.
So, this particular case, the employee had only worked for the company, I think it was a year or 18 months. And the court actually said, no, that's not sufficient. You have to work
Wow.
for the company for a minimum of 2 years in order for there to be sufficient consideration to support this non compete. Well, that case then, it actually was eventually codified into statute. But um,
Wow.
you so employers, I was telling them, well, if you want this to be valid, and you don't know if this employer is going to stay, or this employee is going to
Employee.
stay for 2 years, pay them something up front to kind of support
Mm,
that. And
okay.
I actually had clients that came to me, employees that had been terminated, and they had ridiculous non-compete agreements that they had signed, and I was able to negotiate them out of their non-competes based on that case because they had only been
Wow.
working for the company for 18 months. So that's Illinois. That's not in
Yeah.
Michigan, but there is, there are arguments to be made, whether the consideration is sufficient. So,
Mm,
you know, I think you have to look at what your end goals are and what your concerns are.
sure.
So, non-competes are usually more critical for people in the medical field or
Yeah.
for higher level executive employees or um, you know other businesses where it's a super competitive and you don't
Mhm.
want your employee to be trained by you and you've spent all this money into them and now they're going to work for the competitor and use everything that
For
they've
sure.
learned.
Well,
So
yeah, that's really dicey because, like, what I'm hearing from you is it's really important to have your confidentiality agreement. It's super important to
mhm.
maybe have a non solicitation agreement. The non compete, to me, what I'm hearing is that it might not stand up in court or it could be very costly if you really wanted
It
to.
could be very
If
costly
I really
because
wanted to fight it, I'd have to pay a pretty penny.
yeah, so the non-compete that you were describing from the Traverse City, I would say that's probably not valid.
Mhm.
So, in order for a non-compete agreement to be valid, it has to be reasonable in time, which is the length of the non-compete
Mhm.
agreement, the geographic area, and the scope. So, the number of
Yeah.
years, usually a year, maybe 2, depending on the business, but a
Mhm.
year's probably, um, the the better time frame. The
Sure.
geographic area, that is really gonna depend on where you're located. So, I
Yeah.
had a client when I was in Illinois that we regularly did non-competes. It was a medical office, and we regularly did non-competes with the doctors, and the non-compete agreement was literally like 4 blocks because it was in such a condensed area.
Wow.
So we couldn't say, 25 miles because that would take out almost the entire city, and
Yeah.
we would limit it to, and it was actually more than 4 blocks. But it was something pretty small, but then
Sure.
we added in hospitals.
Okay.
You can't work at this hospital or this hospital. So
Okay.
we kind of handled it that way. And the scope is what they're doing, like telling you you can't do marketing anywhere. Well, marketing is so broad. I
I
mean, what
know.
what does that
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So it has to be, again, protect a legitimate business interest, and then the scope would be something similar to what the same or similar to what you were actually doing for that company. So if you have a non compete that in place and you're going to go work for a competitor but you're going to do a completely different job that has nothing to
Yeah.
do with what you were doing, you may not be in violation of the non-compete. And you know these are important to, again, consult with an attorney to have drafted because you want to make sure that it's going to be enforceable.
Mhm.
What often happens with non-competes is, there's language in there about injunctive relief. The employer who is trying to enforce it will sue the employee and will sue the business that the employee went to work for.
Oh, wow.
They will get a preliminary injunction. And most of the time, preliminary injunctions, or I'm sorry, temporary restraining order is where you start. And that's, a week to 10 days. And then you go into a hearing for a preliminary injunction, which would last
Jeez.
during the entirety of the lawsuit. So, temporary restraining order is, okay, you have to stop working until
Wow.
we sort this out.
That's
And that's
crazy.
something that, yeah, that's something that's done when the employer files the lawsuit. They will ask the court for a temporary restraining order, and it's ex parte, which means it's without notice to anybody.
Mm,
And most of the time, courts will grant them. And
wow.
then they will set a pretty quick hearing, and it's an evidentiary hearing on exactly what's going on. And there's certain factors I won't get into that the
Sure.
employer has to establish. And then if the court finds in favor of the employer, they'll put
Crazy.
what's called a preliminary injunction in place. And that basically stops you from doing your work for the pendency of the lawsuit,
Yeah,
which,
that is
it's
just nuts.
expensive.
To me, yeah, that's
Yeah.
really expensive. And to me, it sounds as though you would really want to be protecting. Like for me, the non compete is protecting a little bit of the confidentiality. Like, you don't want someone to go work for your competitor because they knew what softwares you're using. They are taking all of the training and everything that you provided them, and they still do know your clients, and there are ways to get around things. And so you don't want them to go work with your competitor, but to protect that is really expensive.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so
So, I mean,
you really need to, like you
it,
said, meet with an attorney and sit down and see, what do I really want in my contract that, like you said, I can enforce and that I would want to enforce if I had to. Push came to
right.
shove.
Right. And from the employee's perspective too, I would say, I've consulted with a lot of employees over the years that have had these non-competes. Okay, are you really wanting to go work for a place that is directly competing with your current or prior employer? Is that
Mhm.
really what you're wanting to do? Because here's how much it's going to cost. Here's what's going to happen.
Yeah,
You're going to um, end up in court for a year or two. And that's why, from the any employees that are happen to be listening to this podcast, if you're presented with a non-compete, talk to a lawyer about it. I mean, most
mhm,
lawyers will do it probably just, a flat fee or an hour or something
sure,
to look at it and tell you whether it's good or not. Higher level employees that I've dealt with, both on the employer and the employee side, um, a lot of times the non-competes are negotiated and
mm,
as part of the bigger picture of negotiating their contract. So
yeah,
if they're working on it on the front end, because that's another thing that's looked at with contracts, is who has the power. Um, you
ah,
know who who has the power in this situation. And if an employee is just presented with a contract and is just signing it without seeking legal counsel, um and then they go into court and say, well, I just really needed to get a job and I was
sure,
desperate and they told me I had to sign this, they might be able to have some arguments there. So
yeah,
I do put, when I draft contracts, I do put in there, you've had the opportunity to seek legal counsel, you've chosen not to, just to kind
okay,
of protect
all good
down
stuff,
the
yeah,
road. But yeah, but it's important to kind of figure out what your end goals are. And why do I think this is important? Because it might be able to be handled differently than with
sure,
a non-compete, because again, it's preventing somebody from working.
yeah. And I
And
think I don't know, maybe it's because we live in a small town and I'm from a small town, but I think that if you leave on good terms, even if you don't, conversation goes a long ways. And,
yes,
just having the conversation with the person that you've let go, like, if an opportunity arises, let's talk about it. Because I
right,
think both the person signing and the employee and the employer are probably both good people with great intentions. And
yes,
I know for myself as an employer, I want any employee that I'm no longer working with, whether they leave on their own or not, to have a good life. Like, I'm a good person. So you don't
right,
want to stop anybody from bettering their life, period. But you have to at some point protect your what you've built as well.
right.
So it is that it's a balancing act. But I do think
It absolutely is.
it's having that conversation. It's making sure that everything is outlined. And I definitely agree that meeting with an attorney and getting your ducks in a row, so that when you are presented with a situation that is less than ideal, you can, have a leg to stand on if needed.
Right.
So
Right.
I think, yeah,
Right. And as long as you have, if you really, want the good or the non-compete and you think that it is a legitimate need to protect your business interest, make sure that it's solidly drafted and it
mhm,
is in compliance with the laws. And most
sure.
attorneys will, if they've drafted non-competes and all of a sudden there's a big change in the law and you can't, like Illinois, now there's certain
Yeah,
salary tiers. Like you cannot have a non-compete with employee who makes less than X amount of dollars. So a year. So that's something that I'm sorry, that the attorneys will usually reach out to clients or past clients and say, hey,
sure.
listen, there's been this big change in the law. You really need to take a look at this non compete that we drafted. And
Yeah. Which
we
makes
might
a
need
lot
to
of
modify
sense.
it.
Yeah. But again, another reason, because if you are doing business in those states or you have an employee in those states, it's really important to know the
Yes.
laws and to be working with an attorney who knows those laws. So again, I'm going to
Right.
put Amy's information in the show notes so that you can reach out to her, because there is so much to know. And you can go to these websites online and you can try to read about it and differentiate it for yourself, or you see these contracts templates online. Don't do it. Like, just don't do it. Like, contact somebody.
Please don't do
Yeah,
it.
just don't do it. Contact somebody. So let's just switch gears, because I know we're headed to the end of our time.
Sure.
We could probably talk forever, but I'm really curious, because a lot of small businesses are working with clients for different services. For our
Mhm.
agency, for example, we have a lot of retainer contracts, and we're literally a fractional marketing department for multiple companies. So they don't have a marketing department, we become the marketing department. And therefore, we have contracts with our clients. What are some things that small businesses need to think about when they are drafting their contracts with their clients? What are just some like critical components to have? I mean, because a contract could have a million things. It could be a 20-page document if you wanted it to
Oh,
be.
yeah. Yeah, and who's really gonna read that?
I know, not me.
Um, yeah. I think, the very critical things are, you know what your business does, and you need to have 1, 2, 3 meetings, however many it takes with your client to find out exactly what they want done, what their end goals are, and what their expectations are of you. And then come up with, whether it's 3 to 10 bullet points of what you're going to be doing for them and put that in the contract. And then you want to make sure that you have in there the time frame
Mm,
for getting it done and how much it's going to cost and when payment is expected, whether
okay.
there's a down payment up front, how many days after completion, the back end of the payment or the full payment or however
Okay.
you structure it is going to be paid. And then what's going to happen if they don't pay it? Most
Mm,
contracts will have provisions for attorney's fees. And
sure.
I will say, because you have an attorney fee provision in a contract does not necessarily mean that you are going to get all of your attorney's fees.
Ah.
It's really case dependent. I mean, that's just something to keep in mind because
Yeah.
I've been practicing a long time, and there's probably a handful of cases where I've gotten attorney's fees on, even where it's the
Wow.
contract's very clear. Courts, they don't like to do it,
Mhm.
because the attorney's fees are expensive, and it kind of depends on how clear the term is in the contract and what the case is about and what the defenses are, etc. But
Okay.
I
Interesting.
think those basic things need to be in there. And then you need to have terms in there that if we're going to go beyond what the scope of this contract is, we need to have an addendum. And you just
Mhm.
really have to stay on top of it as the business owner, which
Yeah.
is really hard to do. I mean, I
So
see
hard.
this in my own practice because, we have agreements with all of our clients, and the agreement will say this is what I'm going to do, and sometimes other things come up, and
Mhm.
sometimes they come up really fast,
Yeah.
and I have to act on it, which is the same for a lot of businesses. But you've got to make sure that you do an addendum to the contract, and it's easier now with electronic signature available in that, but
Sure.
do an addendum. So
Okay.
you're saying, okay, here's what, we were only doing your website for you. Now we're going to do your Instagram. We're going to do
Mhm.
posts for Instagram and prep those for you. It's not in the contract. They had some emergency come up. They need a good social media post, and you do it, but make sure that you do an addendum. Okay, this is what we're doing for you, and this is the added cost, and this is when we expect payment, and make sure that it's signed. And, to the extent possible, try to get that in place before you actually do the work. But I know, I mean,
Yeah, it's
we live in a
really it is
fast-paced society, it's hard.
it's really hard, and I think for you develop a relationship for the client with the
Mhm.
client, and you're like, "Oh, I'll do this one time," and then it turns into scope creep happens so quickly.
Right.
And
Yep.
for it to be avoided, it really, like you said, it is important that you have those things in your contract. Like, these are the 10 things that we are agreeing to do for you. This is the scope of work, or you can call it deliverables or whatever, you're
Whatever you
supposed
want
to
to
call.
call it.
Yeah, deliverable scope of work. Here are the 10 things we're going to do for you. And we always include, here are our additional services and what the charges are for them. And
That
that
was what I
way,
was just going to say.
yeah,
So
and
they
then
know.
they know
Yeah.
right up front. And then, is email acceptable if, like, a client comes and says, "Can you add that Instagram post?" Yes, we're $125 an hour, and they say, "Great." Is an email enough? Or you actually have to write an addendum?
Um, I could make it work. Yes, it should be sufficient because it's an addition to the
It has
contract,
to
but
be
I
like a written. It should be, it
it's
should be at
because
least
it's in
written.
writing, because you have
Okay.
a writing to support the contract, and you could actually put that in your contract that if there are additional services, we will confirm by email. I
Okay.
mean, you could put that right in
Okay.
your contract too.
That's a good thing. So anyone listening who is thinking of drafting or working with clients, it really is important to protect yourself so that you're not taking advantage of. And in all of my years of business, I have never had a client who is trying to take advantage. They are
Right.
just wanting work to be done. And if you're going to do it for them for free, they're going to take it,
They're
right?
going to
Like,
take it.
they're going to
Oh,
take it.
yes, I know.
Yeah. And so it really just comes down to you having those boundaries and saying,
Right.
"Yeah, I'll be happy to do it for you, but this is the additional amount." And having it outlined in the contract. And I've gotten better and better and better over the years. I think it was one thing when it was just me as a solopreneur, but then when I had employees and I had employee time being spent on work that's not in the contract, I was like, "Whoa, we need to reel this in." Like,
Yep.
I mean, it's costing
Yep.
me money. Like, it's not
Yeah.
just my
And
time, it's like money.
you need to train your employees with that too, because I mean, typically, depending on the type of business that it is, employees are not going to be the ones entering into the contracts. They're not going to be
Yeah.
signing contracts, or, in some instances, they're not going to have the signing authority. They're not going to be able to bind
Yep.
the employer to a contract. So you need to have them well trained as far as what to do if this is what you're supposed to be doing for the client in this little
Mhm.
box, and now the client wants five more things.
Yep.
How do I handle that? Well, you write up the email summarizing it, and my recommendation would be to then present it to the business owner or whoever is responsible for entering into the contracts, and just do a fast addendum. I mean, you can have templates for that
Sure.
and send it out for electronic signature, and it's pretty fast that way. There's not going to be any confusion, or it could be that the employee misunderstood and maybe the client was just mentioning, "I'd like to have this done." And before the employee, jumps on and starts doing it, and then the employer comes back and says, "Hey," I mean, I'm sorry, not the employer, the client comes back, "Hey, wait, I didn't mean that. I didn't want them to actually start
Got it.
working on it. I was just exploring it." So that way
Sure.
everybody stays on the same page, and then you don't run into issues with sticker shock when they get the bill, like, "Wait a minute, I didn't
Oh, yeah.
agree to this."
Yeah.
So, and it's also, as a litigator, the more paper I have, the better. And by paper, I'm using the term loosely. I mean, like, electronic is
Digital, yeah.
great, digital
Yeah.
is fantastic.
Absolutely.
There's only so much storage space for paper.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. My sister who works she prints everything off. She saves everything
Uh-huh.
because she just is like, you never know when you're going to need it. Proof is in the pudding, and I think that that's a
Yeah.
great way to be. I'm a little more relaxed on that, but I love your advice of, you know, like the business owner myself, I am the one signing the contracts. I'm writing the contracts, but your employees need to be privy to what the scope of work is, what the deliverables are,
Right.
so they know what services they're providing to the client. And then when that scope of work or that scope creep starts to happen, that's usually when, myself or someone in a higher level steps in and the addendum is, taking place, or
Right.
the conversation is happening with the client, like, "Okay, we can do this for you, but this needs to happen." Some other things in contracts that I've found, and you can tell me if this is right or wrong, but, and I like how you said, having when payment is due, how much it, but you mentioned, if payment isn't provided on time, are what's the next steps? Is there a late fee? What is the late fee?
Late
I
fees.
find
Yep.
that is really important and that you can't leave that out of your contract.
Right. No, that
Yeah.
needs to be in there. If there's going to be any kind of interest, that needs to be in the contract. And, you know, sometimes it's hard to get paid. And then, as a
Mhm.
small business, you have to decide what your threshold is
Yeah.
for non-payment, whether you're going to pursue collections. So,
Okay.
but I think having, if it's not paid within 10 business days, this much interest is going to be added, and there's going to be a late fee, and it's a monthly late fee, or whatever,
Yeah.
you decide for your
Yep. And it's
business.
kind of like raising kids. Like I feel like you if you give them an inch, they take a mile, right? And so like
Yes.
if you say you're going to have a late fee, you have to actually apply the late
You have
fee.
to charge the late fee. Right.
Because the
And
next time it's gonna happen again, and it's not gonna be 10 days, it's gonna be 20 days, then it's gonna be 30 days,
right.
and it's you have to actually uphold the contract that you signed because
Right.
otherwise it's not worth signing. Like, again,
Right.
the
And
contract is only as good as the 2 people who sign it.
exactly. And sometimes too, with the interest and the late fees, if somebody's really past due, they're 60, 90 days past due, that's something that you can then use as a negotiator. If
Mm,
Because at that point you want to just get paid, and you're probably maybe not going to work with that particular
yeah,
client anymore. And you could tell them, listen, if you pay me this amount by this date, I will waive all the interest in it. And I almost said attorney's fees,
yeah,
interest and late fees.
yeah. The library
But
does it.
yeah, yeah.
The library does
Yeah.
that. You can return your
Well,
books and they'll waive your fees if you do it on this one day. I also find, because again, we are in a small community, that if someone is habitually late or things are happening, have a conversation with that client. They might be having a struggle that you're not
yeah,
aware of, and that if you just have that conversation, you might learn that they are struggling in their business and they might not wanted to have you to tell you or to admit that, or they're embarrassed by something that they need to pause, and that just simple conversation of picking up the
right,
phone and saying, hey, is everything okay, because you've been late a few times and I'm going to have
right.
to have the late fee and I don't want to do that. Is everything okay?
Yeah.
So many people are afraid to just have the conversation, but I think sometimes you can just avoid a lot of misunderstandings if you have that
Yes.
conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And that's an instance where then you could consider doing a payment plan. Like,
Yeah.
okay, so, you owe $500. Can you pay $100 a month for the next 5 months?
Absolutely.
And maybe that's something a little bit more doable. And if that's something that you do, then, okay, we'll do the payment plan. We're going to waive our interest. We're going to waive our late fees. Give me a credit card and I'll just charge the credit card every month,
Sure.
and then make sure everything is in writing.
Yeah. I mean, because ultimately at the end of the day, it's your business and you're driving
Right.
the train. And so you can make exceptions especially if if you want a relationship with your clients, if you really value that relationship with them, to me, it warrants having that conversation versus just immediately assessing the late charge. At least that's what we do. And then if,
Yeah.
then sometimes you just have to. It's like, okay, this
Something
is
you have to,
yeah,
right?
like this is the contract, this is what you signed. But we always have that conversation first, and then if it's continuing to happen, that might be time to assess it. But yeah, it's just about that
Yeah.
conversation. So one last question. I actually have a
Sure.
dozen more questions, but I'm gonna one last question I ask all my guests. What is a big win that you've had in your business that you can share with fellow entrepreneurs to inspire them? Because you have a woman-owned business. You have
Yes.
a law firm of, women, which is super awesome. Girl power, woman power, and we've used Claire Forster for our estate planning years and years ago. And so I mean, I can personally attest to you having great attorneys at your firm and, just you guys being a great law firm in Petoskey, Michigan. So, but you've had to have had really big wins. So a big win to inspire
I
anybody?
I think that, when I was thinking about that, I think the big win is our firm. I mean, honestly, we started this firm the day everything shut down from COVID, which was not an optimal time to
Crazy.
start a law firm.
No.
So, prior to that, Claire, Jane, and Jenny had been working with a different firm, and I was on my own. And it's funny because yesterday my husband showed me a picture that came up in his Time Hop or whatever the Android version of that is. Um, he hasn't drunk the Kool-Aid yet. I keep trying to get
Oh,
him to get an
no.
iPhone, but he's still stuck with the green bubbles.
That's funny.
But anyway, he showed me a picture of me when I moved into my little tiny office above what used to be the pie company and then Grain
Yes, so
Train
right now
Cafe
it's
on
malted
Mitchell.
vinyl. I actually remember that picture because I was on your
Yes.
Google
Yep.
profile recently. Yes, and you're standing outside. It's like a yellowish building,
Yep,
whatever.
yep,
Yes, yes, and
yep.
you're
They
doing
did
your
my
ribbon
ribbon
cutting.
cutting and
Yep.
yep, and then he had another picture of me inside. I mean, honestly, this office was so tiny. It was like the width of a desk, but I got it because I wanted to have signage out front because I was new. I mean, my husband had his family had lived up here, but it was his mom who was remarried. So it was not the same last name. So it was not like people knew who I was. I'm like, how
Yeah.
am I going to start this business? I don't know anybody. And then, fast forward a couple years to when I joined with Jenny and Jane and Claire, and we started the firm the day everything shut down. We couldn't even be in the office together.
Oh my
We had
gosh.
our wonderful, awesome Serena who ran the office, and she was our what did we call them? Necessary employee. I can't even remember what we called
Yeah,
it back then.
yeah, I
But
don't even remember.
uh,
It's like a
and
blur.
when yeah, so it was honestly really scary because
Mhm.
we were starting this firm, but I had some clients at the time. I was like, well, how is this going to work? And it just went gangbusters. And
Yeah.
then, we Jenny left to become judge, and we ended up Claire and I were able to buy our office building, and we have a very thriving practice owned by females, and it's just amazing. I mean, to
It's
me,
awesome.
that whole trajectory from moving up here to starting my own practice to now, looking outside at the lake from my office that I own is just amazing.
Yeah.
And
That
it's
is a
it
huge
it
win. I
takes
mean,
it takes a
that's
lot
huge.
of hard work, but
It
yeah,
does.
and
Yeah.
it's been I honestly I really enjoy it. It's very stressful, but we are we're busy, but it's great.
Yeah.
I love working with the businesses in this community and, providing assistance and guidance with the things that come up, some very interesting issues sometimes. But yeah, so
Yeah, I can
we,
only imagine what those 4 walls have heard.
yeah, so we have, right now we have Claire who handles the estate planning portion along with Jane Nelson. And then we have Jessica Heston is of counsel. She actually, it's what's interesting about our firm is we have 5 attorneys right now, and 3 of us are from Chicago. So
Oh my
um,
gosh.
it's, yeah, it's not a
Wow.
requirement, but we just kind of chuckle at that. And
That is
then we recently hired Stacy Lamont Diedrich, and she is handling some criminal law and juvenile and that kind of stuff. And we also try to work with the courts and do court appointments to provide service there as well for the community.
That is awesome. That is a really huge win because I remember when you came to town, and I remember I held a conference, the 818 conference with Stephanie
Hmm.
Baker, and you
Yes.
helped sponsor that, and just getting your name out there. I think that that is an important thing for any small business owner listening because
Yes.
everyone's going to start somewhere. You're going to start from nothing. You're going to start from maybe moving into a town where nobody knows you, or you maybe everybody knows you, but they don't know your business. And some of the
Right.
things that I've seen you do consistently, whether it was at the beginning or even today, is that you're continually networking. You're attending events,
Yeah.
you're putting your name out there. You sponsored, Kale and Cheeks, the Clinks podcast. Like, you are putting yourself out there, and you want to be known, and you want your firm to be known. And you have to do that, whether it's your first year in business or your 20th year in business. You just kind of can't
Yes.
stop the networking. And of course, you've made some good decisions and partnered with some great people, which has probably
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
helped. So that's
Keep it real
awesome.
social.
Yeah.
Fixing my Google page.
I know. Well, thank you so
Yep,
much, Amy. I
absolutely.
really appreciate your time today. I know you're busy. You probably have a stack of calls to return now after
Oh, I'm
recording
sure.
this
I'm sure I
podcast.
do.
Oh my gosh. But one last disclaimer for everybody is that this is not legal advice. This is everything
Correct.
today was really for educational purposes, conversational. We want you to consult with your attorney or visit the show notes, connect with Amy and her firm. It can be scary running a small business, hiring employees, deciding whether you're going to have an independent contractor or an employee, having contracts with clients. It's a lot to juggle, but
Mhm.
the more you know, the better you're going to do. So do me a favor, share this show with another small business if it's helped you. Let's share the love and help one another because we're all in this together trying to build our businesses one day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year at a time. If you're a small business interested in sponsoring this pod to help us keep creating this great content and having guests like Amy, make sure you hit me up at summer with an O at keepitrealsocial.com or visit the show notes. And until next week, please look at your contracts and ensure that you're protecting yourself.